Hey there, my name is Zach Renard. I'm the founder of WePGPR, and in today's video, we're going to be covering the 3 types of stories every guest must have when you're going on podcasts. Before interviews, the best guests are not going to be winging these interviews. You're going to be coming prepared, having a strategic approach, and that comes with having stories, preparing yourself. If you just wing it, you can do good. But in my experience, the people that prepare, it's like if you're doing like a keynote, you're probably not going to wing the keynote. You're probably going to prepare some notes. You're going to have a PowerPoint, some Google slides, make sure that you know exactly what we're going to be talking about. And it's a bit similar with podcasts. You're going to make sure that you can deliver a very good performance and that you're seen as the expert here. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, and let's get right into it. So a couple things that we're going to be covering. We're going to be talking about why most guests sound very salesy and why that's something that you do not want to do, some of the biggest mistakes. Also, we're going to talk about how to adapt your story to different audiences, because believe it or not, your story is not going to be appealing to every single audience if you just share it as is. You want to tweak it to make it more appealing and relevant to that audience. And the last piece of the puzzle, I'm going to show you a 7-day prep plan whenever you're getting ready to go on a podcast, how you should approach doing so. So some of the biggest mistakes that I personally see whenever anyone goes on a podcast, I run my own podcast too, and I can tell you from experience that I do hear people sometimes doing that, and I have to give them a bit of coaching and feedback afterwards. But people that name their service consistently on the podcast, they repeat the company, the product, the service, like, oh, we have this package here, like for this, like we will get you 50 social media videos in like the next like 20 days or so. It's like, hey, if you want to work with us, like, we can do that for you. The goal whenever you're on a podcast is to educate people, provide value. And if the entire time you're being salesy, trying to promote your services, products, etc., it's going to be a major turnoff for a lot of people. They're just going to tune out. Most likely, they're not even going to finish listening to your episode, which is definitely not what we want to happen here. Another one that I see pretty often is vague advice hidden behind like a paywall, for example. And a good example of that is some people are going to give you some very like general advice, and like, sure, it sounds great in like theory, but if you think about it more, it's like, okay, they're giving me advice, but for me to be able to apply this advice based on the suggestion, I kind of need to work with them. And that's like the last thing you want to do. You don't want to put like something that's like, hey, you need to work with us if you want to be able to apply this advice, because it doesn't feel genuine. It's like, yeah, I'm providing value, but if you want to be able to use the value I'm providing to you, you need to work with me. And no one wants that. The advice that you should give to someone should be advice that they should be able to apply directly on their own. But keep in mind, a lot of people, they want to hire expert. They want to work with people who know what they're doing, and they want to save time. So they're probably not going to go do it themselves if they have the expert right in front of them. But if you try to sell the entire time through the podcast, you give these offers, like these values that can only be applied when they work with you, then that's obviously a big no-no here. And another one is if you're ending every single answer to the question of the podcast host with a plug. I see this very often where people are going to provide like a good amount of values, spend like maybe 1-2 minutes or so, and then they'll end their answer with like, yeah, like we actually do this at our company. Like if you want to work with us, just go to our website, book a call, we can talk to you and we'll show you how to do it. Don't do that. Just provide the value as is. When it gets to the call to action part, which is at the end of the podcast, not in the middle, the start or anything, then you can have your call to action. And we have some other videos on the channel that talk about creating a very effective call to action, but very important that you don't plug your services every part of the way. Not the way to go. And what I like to do is I like to call the permission test. And this kind of goes hand in hand with the input I was saying earlier, but you want to ask the question, if they followed your advice, would they get value without hiring you? If that's the case, you're teaching people, you're providing value, but if not, you're pitching people, and you don't want to do that. So if someone can go, they can listen to your advice, like, great, this is amazing advice, I can apply this in my business directly, that's perfect. This is exactly what you want to do. But if you give advice and that person's like, okay, I can do this part, but for this part of the puzzle, I kind of need to work with them, that's not directly actionable insights or like advice. So it's not going to resonate with people. So make sure to take that permission test anytime that you are giving advice or you're going on the podcast here. Another thing I recommend that you do whenever that you go on podcasts is we have like 3 story type. Like the first one that we have is the analogy, which is really just making something, a complex idea, complicated, make it very simple, like make it click so people can like directly like, oh, like that makes sense. Again, this is all about like storytelling, but analogies are like your fastest trust builders. It shows that you understand the audience because you're breaking it down in a very simple manner for them to understand it, and it makes that expertise like instantly relatable because you make it very simple. A good example is like if you're posting the same content on LinkedIn and maybe TikTok, for example, it's like wearing a tuxedo to a beach party. It's like the same person, but it is a completely wrong context. You probably wouldn't be wearing a tuxedo on TikTok, for example, but LinkedIn, you know, maybe makes a little bit more sense if you go to like an event, summit, or anything like that, but you have to keep that in mind. So a great analogy is going to replace any of like the jargon with like recognition. So like the listener can think like, hey, I get it, like it makes sense. And another thing that you have to think about is you've been in your industry, in your space, probably for years, maybe decades, and you know the ins and out, you know all the complicated words and everything like that that make sound new, maybe make you sound like an expert. But the only issue is the potential clients that you want to work with, they might not know what these words mean, and you're just complicating it for them, which is totally fine. You should still be using some of these words to show that you know what you're talking about, you have the expertise piece to it, but you want to use analogies to make what you're saying very digestible and understandable for the audience that may not have the same level of understanding that you do, considering you've been in the space for maybe decades here. And there's really like three part to like an analogy. You want to match the audience, so make it very relevant to the specific audience you're talking to. Obviously, if you're talking to an audience that's very technical, you can use some more complicated keywords and terms to make it more relevant to them here. But you also want to keep it one sentence, so make it very straightforward. Don't make it an entire story or anything like that. Make it very easy to understand, and then you can go deeper. The analogy is like really where you can use it as like a doorway. Like once they're nodding along, they understand what you're talking about, this is where you can get them to like the conclusion and like the real insight, which is very important here. So the second story, which is probably one of my favorite ones, is your story. So we obviously have analogies that you can use throughout a podcast episode, but your story is also very important too, because this is where you can connect on an emotional level with potential client. They can relate to you, etc. And the way I like to frame it is really like a foundation, like who you are, what you're doing, why you're doing in the first place. The first thing that you obviously want to go with is the struggle. Let's start with the challenge you face, something that your audience will recognize in like themselves. Maybe it can be like very relatable. The discovery can be like what you learned from it, what you tested, or realized like what it changed everything. Be specific. If you can add data, moments, numbers, names, anything like that, it's going to be much more easier for people to like remember that versus just saying like, oh, I worked at a company. Versus saying like, hey, I worked at Amazon and I realized that I didn't want to do this 9-to-5 thing and I want to start my own company. So be like very specific here. And the last thing is like the lessons, like after like going through the struggles, doing these things, I learned X, Y, and Z, and this is how you can personally apply it. So again, you want to tie in the story, but tie directly into like some actionable advice to make it like very relevant and actionable to the audience here. So when you're going about your story, you typically will only mention this in the beginning. You're probably not going to be adding that at the end of the podcast. Most podcasters are going to ask you like, hey, tell us about yourself, who you are. And this is where you can start to add like why you started, what you're doing, who you are, that struggle, discovery, and like the lesson / like learning side of things here. So very important story. That's probably one of the most important one that I would try to craft. And we're going to be talking a little bit more about that. But first one you want to craft is figure out exactly what your story is, what your origin story is. Whenever you go on podcasts, you make sure that you memorize that, and you easily can go on any podcast, just spit it out easily without trying to like stumble or anything like that. The case study is the third story, and it probably is, like I said, number 2 was my favorite, but I think the case study is probably my favorite one. So you do have to do it in a very strategic way. Some people are going to start talking about the clients, the result that got them, like how other people can like do it, which is fine, but you want to do it in like a very strategic approach. So you want to like focus on solving the listener's problem rather than promoting your business. Very important here. You want to provide actionable, data-baked advice that listeners can actually implement themselves. If you remember earlier, we talked about if your advice can be applied directly without hiring you, you're in good hands. If not, you want to retry that approach and readjust it here. And the last piece of the puzzle is mentioning your business or service sparingly and only when it's directly relevant. Don't overdo it. That's the last thing that you want to do. So a well-placed client story is your most powerful credibility tool, but only when it's sold as a lesson, not a commercial ad or sponsored placement or anything like that here. So a lot of founders, like companies, podcast guests that I see are going to do like, hey, that's exactly why your company, we build these custom strategies. And most of our clients, they typically see like a 300% like ROI because we handle everything. Like directly when I'm hearing this directly, it's like, okay, if I want what this person is advising me to do, etc., I have to work with them. That's like really like the only way I'll be able to do it. But if you lead more with value first, it's more like, hey, the biggest mistake is treating all the channel the same. LinkedIn needs a controversial first line backed by data. I discovered that this after analyzing 1,000 posts, 10,000 posts, and you can test this yourself. So post the same message on like both platforms, see what happens, A/B test it, and then you can adjust as you need it. So you can see the difference between the two. One of them saying like, hey, if you want this result, this outcome, right, etc., like I'm giving you advice, work with us. The other one's like, hey, we tested this ourselves. This is what we learned. If you want to do the same thing, test it for yourself, do it this way, then you'll see what works for you and what doesn't work. So you want to lead with the problem, share the insight, not the invoice, and then you want the results to speak for themselves. So very important here. And we talked about earlier, like adapting your stories for any audience. So there's really like 3 levels. There's going to be the sophistication level, the outcome focus, and then the character selection. So the first one is, okay, is it a beginner audience? Is it someone that's like very technical, like experts? You want to figure out exactly who that profile is of the listener. Second is, what is this person trying to achieve? Are they looking for freedom, time freedom? Or are they trying to grow visibility? Or are they trying to grow the company? Like, what are they looking for specifically? So you can tie in the stories and the storytelling component within your appearance and interviews here. And the last piece of the puzzle is character selections. For example, if you're speaking to an audience of financial advisors, then you want to cater that specifically towards that audience. But if you're speaking to an e-commerce brand owner, then you want to tailor that too. So you don't want to make it extremely too broad. You want to make it specific to your ICP, the person that is listening to the podcast, the person's going to benefit from what you're saying. An example of something a bit more like beginner friendly is like, I set up an email automation, basically emails that automatically send email based on what a customer does. Expert level is more like, hey, we implemented a behavioral trigger based nurture sequence with dynamic segmentation and predictive send time optimization. One of them sounds very simple. The other one sounds very technical, but it's the exact same thing. So again, very depending on like the audience that you have. And there's really like a couple things you want to look at to make sure that your story interview is like ready. So you want to be specific, you want to be flexible, you want to bring expertise, and you want to bring trust building. So you want to make sure that you have a good mix of like everything here. So like every story in your library should pass all those 4 checks. If a story is too vague, listeners are not going to remember that. If it can't flex the show's like length or focus, approach, you'll either rush or ramble. You're not going to be able to go fully into your story. So you want to be very specific into what makes a story stick. Very important here. So last piece of the puzzle, I promised that we would have a short and simple 7-day story prep plan. So first thing, whenever you're getting ready for a podcast, whether it's in a week or 2, we're going to use 7 days as this example. So a week, day 1 and 2, this is where you want to generate the raw material. What I would do is I'd probably just use AI, ChatGPT, Claude or so to prompt to draft different stories for you. And you want to add those onto paper, because this is where you can write them, you can remember them, you can read them, and then it's going to flow much more naturally whenever you go ahead and go to the podcast. What I'd recommend do, we talked about 3 different stories. So ChatGPT and Claude typically will have a lot of information about yourself because you've probably spoken and communicated a lot with that AI. So you'll be able to get all that data, maybe stuff that you even forgot, and ask it based on like everything that you know about me. I'm going on podcasts. I need 3 different stories, some analogies, my origin stories, some case study ones. Can you help me come up with some very naturally sounding stories that I could use? When you have this is where day 3 to 4, you could probably do on the same day, to be honest with you, but this is where you want to add real details, like replace some like the more like generic language, because obviously AI tends to do that a lot, with names, numbers, moments, specific results. Make it like very like yours, like very specific, so when you do read it, it doesn't sound like a robot is controlling you by like any means here. And then next is obviously practicing out loud. So you want to make sure that you know exactly how you're going to talk about it, say it. Very important. Practice makes perfect. I'm sure that you know this, but you can also even record yourself, tell the story, and like watch it back and look at what makes it feel like maybe clunky or like unnatural, and do it until that you're knocking out of the park and it sounds very great. One thing to keep in mind, it's never going to be perfect. Whenever you do the podcast, you're going to get more practice, you're going to get better. And as you start doing more of them, this is where it's obviously going to reflect in your performance here. The last thing I like to do is building a cheat sheet. So if you've ever been in school, you know that when you have some tests, sometimes you could do a little cheat sheet. You would take 1 page, you would write as much as possible in that 1 sheet, and you could have it during the test. You want to do something a little bit similar with podcasts, where get a little 1 card per like story, put the title, the trigger question that will end up cueing it. So if a host asks you a certain question, this is the time to use this specific story, and add a like 3-word summary. So keep it very simple. Don't try to like script it. Make it very simple. And the reason I'm telling you this is I have a lot of people on podcasts where a host is going to send like a general like outline or anything, and that person is going to write like paragraphs and paragraphs like, oh, I'm going to be talking about this. I can almost guarantee you that you will not do that. And if you do, it's going to sound very unnatural because the host is going to see you read on the screen every paragraph on your cards, your screen, or anything like that. Make it very simple, make it bullet points. You just look at it for 2 seconds, just like I did. And then you're like, okay, I know exactly what we're talking about. I obviously did the practice. I know how to answer this. Once you've done this, you're going to be able to walk into every interviews with your knowledge, your stories, and your case study ready, and you'll crush it. So if you're ready to turn your appearances into conversion, apply this framework. You can triple or even quadruple your conversions with each appearances by telling better stories, and you'll get more success out of it. If you're looking to skip that entire process of getting booked on podcasts, my name is Zach Renard again. I'm the founder of We Feature PR. We are a leading podcasting booking agency that's built relationships with over 800 podcast hosts, and we leverage those to get you booked on podcasts. So if you want to get booked on podcasts, look at the link in the description, wefeature.com. There's going to be a little button to book a call. Book that in, and I'll speak to you soon.